Welcome, everyone. I see folks are signing in, and that's great. My name is DJ Wells. I am the director of the Mensah Research Institute and also the director of marketing and communications for Mensah Medical. Thank you for joining us for this important webinar event where we'll be talking about the importance of immune health in light of the current situation globally as far as the COVID-19 pandemic is concerned. We have with us today Dr. Albert Mensah and nutrition expert Samantha Gilbert. I'm sure that most of you are aware of Dr. Mensah's and Samantha's backgrounds, and so I'm not going to take the time to read a bio for you. We want to jump right in and make sure that we're sharing this information with you that's so very important. A little bit in terms of ground rules, we will have a question and answer function on the Zoom screen that you're participating in this webinar, that you're using to participate in this webinar. So as you have questions, please type them in the Q&A section. We're going to allow Dr. Mensah and Ms. Gilbert to chat with you for a little bit, share some important information that they think needs to be foundational to our conversation. And then after about 20-30 minutes, I will come back in and start sharing with Dr. Mensah and with Ms. Gilbert some of the questions that you all are typing in for us. And we'll spend some time answering those questions. If at any point you have to leave the webinar, please know that we are live streaming this webinar on the Mensah Medical Facebook page. And so you can go there and watch the full video, watch the video in its entirety. You can also encourage other folks to take a look at the video, folks that you know may not have joined us for this event while it was live streaming. And then also, if there are questions that come up that you want answered after the webinar is over, you can certainly type them into the contents or the comments section on Facebook, and we will either get back to you by responding to those comments, or we'll hold on to those questions because we plan on being back here for the next 3 weeks. Same time, same place for the next 3 weeks to once again share important information, talk about updates on what's going on in the world as it relates to COVID-19, and then certainly to answer your questions as they're presented. So with all that said, I'm going to get out of the way and allow Samantha Gilbert and Dr. Albert Mensah to share some information that they feel is important regarding this COVID-19 outbreak, and then I'll come back on in about 25-30 minutes and begin feeding them the questions that you're sending in to us. Thank you so much again for joining us, and Dr. Mensah, Ms. Gilbert, if you will.
Wonderful. Thank you, DJ. Really appreciate the introduction. And I think, sorry, Dr. Mensah, can you hear me okay?
I can. Can you hear me, Sammy?
Yes, thank you.
All right.
You know, first of all, I know that I speak for Dr. Mensah, that we just want everyone to know that we are thinking of you. You're in our thoughts, you're in our prayers. We realize this is a very, very difficult time, and we hope that this webinar will be beneficial for you to support you and your family in boosting not only immunity, but your spirit, and you know, help you move forward as we learn more about this outbreak. So with that being said, Dr. Mensah, we had a great conversation on Saturday as we were preparing for this webinar. And one of the things that I'm seeing that isn't out there is how this virus proliferates, and cyclophiles versus thermophiles. And I'm hoping you can kind of start us off in this direction, and then we'll move forward into the food conversation from there.
Certainly. Thank you, Sammy. And I'm just so excited to be able to do this with you. For you folks out there, you don't know what a wealth of information you've got from Samantha Gilbert. So I asked Sammy if we could use her wisdom and knowledge to help educate ourselves in a variety of areas regarding diet and health at this particular point in time, because that's what's not really being discussed. And then for some people, that's actually a killer, believe it or not. When we're talking about the virus itself, and I really want to talk about more the family of viruses. Viruses in general can be broken down into at least two categories. One are known as psychrophiles, and the other one is known as thermophiles. So a psychrophile basically is one that thrives in a cold environment. If you notice around the globe at where a lot of these coronaviruses are sort of proliferating, they're in the colder temperate regions, so to speak. You don't see them as much on the continent of Africa or the continent of South America and in warmer climates. This particular virus is a family of viruses, the coronaviruses, tend to really thrive in colder temperatures. It's even been discussed on some of the sites, such as UNICEF and the CDC, that really higher than 80 to 90 degrees, these particular viruses don't thrive very well. So if you notice in general, more colds, more flus happen in the winter seasons in the United States, because that's when temperatures go down, they cool off, and that's when those viruses thrive. So in theory, now we don't know, every virus can be different, but in theory, this particular virus should actually go down in terms of its proliferation when the warmer months hit. So that's the difference. Thermophiles, on the other hand, are organisms that thrive extremely well in the heat. Some of them can live near the volcanic ash that's erupting from the ocean floor. And we didn't think that was possible. So what we're dealing with, though, now seems to be a psychrophile, an agent that is a cold temperature creature. And so that's why so many are more vulnerable during the colder months and certainly on the colder continents, the colder countries.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. And it's one of the reasons why we drink hot soup and we're encouraged to drink hot things, because that also is going to help kill off the virus. And I think that one of the things that's interesting about what I'm seeing in the media specifically, and I'll just tell you a brief story, is that there isn't an emphasis on the temperature of our foods, really. I was at the gym the other day before my gym closed down and, doing my thing on the treadmill. And, up pops a Coors Light commercial, and the woman's on her couch with a blanket over her and her sweet little doggy. And you think she's going to grab a mug of tea. And suddenly she grabs her Coors Light and pops that open and guzzles it down. And I just kind of shook my head, like that's the last thing that we want to be thinking about, is drinking cold beverages and drinking cold foods, things like ice cream and so forth during this time period. And I know that the comfort foods are what we want to move toward, because we're anxious and we're worried. Totally understand that. However, what I want to do is encourage people to move toward the things that are actually whole, real foods, which we'll talk about in a moment, that are warm. And I'm not really seeing that out there. Are you, Dr. Mensah?
No, that's the problem. We sit down, now everybody knows if you got a cold, what does mom do? What does grandma do? Hot chicken soup, right? Because we're warming up our core. Why do we get fevers in the first place? We get fevers to actually try to bake out or make uncomfortable either the virus or the bacteria that's threatening our health. So we temperature is a very powerful tool, yet many of us will drink cold beverages, we'll drink cold water to take our medication. Now, when you take in cold water, what happens is that you actually start to increase mucus production in the chest. You increase the capacity for these organisms to actually thrive, not actually benefit you. So you're taking your medication with cold water, and then all of a sudden now you're making it more difficult to actually help yourself just by way of the temperature of the food you're taking in. The same with orange juice, the same with soda, all those comfortable things that Sammy's talking about. These are real problems. So temperature alone is a very big deal.
Yeah, thank you.
That's what we're not talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. This kind of leads into also, I feel, since you mentioned taking things with cold water. You know, when I'm at the gym, I see most people with ice cubes in their water. But when we're not feeling well and we're taking things like Tylenol with cold water, and when you know the effects that Tylenol have on the body, that can also be, you know, problematic as well. Can you speak to that?
Certainly. Well, you know, Tylenol is a great creature for fevers. The problem is when we have illness right now, we're not in a great situation with either the Tylenol categories or the ibuprofens, unfortunately. Both can be problematic in terms of the system. You know, many of you out there already know what Tylenol does to glutathione, okay? That tends to be a bit of a challenge. For certain other medications in certain parts of your system, even ibuprofen, which is anti-inflammatory, can have its challenging effects as well. So these are kind of problematic areas. And so when we're having to take these particular elements or agents in order to try to help with fevers or pain or inflammation, we also have to further gird ourselves with more nutrition and nutrient therapy. If we're going to mess glutathione stores and deplete it, well, we've got to add some things into our diet and into our nutritional state to further support glutathione production. So, Sammy, let's talk for a minute about some of the foods that are really great in terms of supporting glutathione and antioxidant potential.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad you asked, because I do want to have a conversation about what is food and what it isn't. I encourage people during this time to have what I call a macro mindset. And what that means is to focus on your whole foods, your fresh fruits and vegetables, all those beautiful polyphenols, your animal proteins, and also your healthy fats. And macro just basically means your proteins, your carbohydrates, and your fats that you get from the food that you eat. And they also contain an abundance of micronutrients, which Dr. Mensah will talk about in a moment. Now, I realized that, you know, with all the chaos that things are sold out in the store, you know, we've got so many empty shelves. I was just at the store the other day. But what I am noticing is that the fresh produce is available. So the canned goods, which unfortunately have no nutritional value, they're not going to give us those macro and micronutrients that we need so our bodies can make its own supply of one of our master antioxidants, glutathione. But, you know, it's just, it's amazing how that works. And I just want to encourage you to think about going to the fresh produce area. I know most people are home, things have been canceled. This is a great time to come together in the kitchen. A lot of these things can be frozen and then heated up for later use. So that's where we're going to get those powerful nutrients in those whole, what we call nutrient dense foods. And of course, want to, you know, just friendly reminder that you make sure that you heat those up before you eat them.
Okay.
Now,
Everyone out there, just remember in about another 15 minutes, we're going to be answering questions. So just want to quick remind you, go ahead and start plugging your questions in. Sammy, go ahead.
yeah, thank you, Dr. Mensah. And another thing I also wanted to mention, you know, one of our amazing nutrients in and of itself is water. And I always drink my water at room temperature. I know, of course, when it's hot out, we want to have it more cold. You know, we want to add ice cubes to our water. But right now, I do want to encourage people to still make sure that you're being properly hydrated. I know water is often also absent and sold out. If you do have water jugs, which I do, the water machines are still working. You can fill those up so that you have that supply. I hope that is available to you. I am seeing in stores where there are water jugs available. Now, again, I'm in California, but I do, again, want to encourage that. And, you know, one of the things that we also talked about, Dr. Mensah, as we kind of move into what isn't food, I kind of touched on the canned goods not having any nutritional value whatsoever. But let's talk about how not only the brain, but also the body are really inflamed with a lot of these foods. And of course, if we're susceptible already, which, you know, which is more in the epigenetic realm that we can get into. But if you're susceptible already in eating these foods, there's which are causing even more inflammation, you know, we want to help people navigate that. So Dr. Mensah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up, Sammy. One of the things I want to mention here is there's emphasis on the fact that, well, you know what, it seems to be the elderly, the debilitated, those individuals who've got diabetes, hypertension, lung disease, kidney disease, the folks who seem to have some type of underlying condition that are, you know, most susceptible to, unfortunately, demise at this particular point in time. Mm-hmm. That is true. That is absolutely true. But I want to share with you that America is sicker than America used to be 40 years ago. The world is not as healthy as it should be. We are all, for the most part, most of the United States of America is swimming within our own bodies in a sea of malnutrition and caloric excess. Now, what does that mean? All of our fun favorite foods, the pizzas, the pastas, the breads, all those wonderful things, the beer and all that other stuff, it's all inflammatory. Absolute soda, big time. All inflammatory. So now what does that do? That weakens the immune system. The immune system is so busy trying to cool off the inflammation in our bodies that it makes us more vulnerable to attack from bacteria, viruses, and other organisms. So one of the real big challenges here and why we're talking is to help people recognize that, first of all, dietary change is huge at this particular point in time. You've got to cut out the inflammatory foods to give your system the best possible chance. Look, folks that are in the senior citizen homes, the nursing homes right now, one of their biggest challenges that no one talks about is the fact that they are malnourished. These individuals, for the most part, don't eat a lot. Yeah, well, the nursing home feeds them, right? Okay, but look what they feed them and look how many of them actually eat the full spectrum of food that they've got in front of them. As we age, our sense of smell declines. Things don't taste as good. People could just as soon eat peanut butter as they could a steak. So our senior citizens really are very well malnourished. That is part of the challenge behind why they get so sick. And what we are doing is that we are actually emulating that formula if we're living on a high fast food diet or a high carb diet or a high inflammatory diet. Well, yes, we may not be as vulnerable as our seniors because somehow or another we force our bodies to try to compensate. But it still makes us more vulnerable than we should be. So, Sammy, if you could talk more about some of the foods that really will give us that power pack punch and what you're seeing with regard to the people you talk to with regard to their typical diet and how that's actually making them more vulnerable to disease processes like what we're seeing now.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. As you were talking, I was, you know, just remembering a conversation I had yesterday with one of our patients. And in that conversation, I said, let's just go back to basics. We don't have to make this hard. Again, we appreciate that this is a really trying time. There's a lot of stress. We're under a lot of pressure right now. There's a lot of fear, but we can go back to basics. The foods that I'm promoting right now that I think are really, really nourishing are things like winter squashes, proteins. There are proteins that are available in the stores here. I know they're selling out in most places, but I want to encourage you to also focus on your protein foods, whether it's chicken breast or ground beef or lamb. Those are proteins. The amino acids in them are the building blocks for our bodies, especially if you have a condition that I have called undermethylation. If you don't know what that means, that's okay. We're going to dig into that deeper as we move along in this series. But those types of foods, those whole dense foods, especially those proteins, are really packed with a lot of good nutrients. And they're also very blood sugar stabilizing. Many of us are in a sympathetic mode right now, which means fight and flight, which means that our immune system is dumping nutrients like gangbusters right now. So that's why a return to the basics and just these simple, great whole foods. I mean, just yesterday, I threw some butternut squash, in the oven. And then I had some chicken breasts that I cooked up in my crock pot. And that's how I do chicken breast now. I don't have to turn on the oven. It's the juiciest, tenderest chicken breast you'll ever have. And you can just pull it apart with a fork. And then I have about 3 or 4 days worth in my fridge. I have some in the freezer. And I just mix that up with my squash and a little bit of salt. I put ghee in mine, which is clarified butter, where all the milk solids are cooked out. So if you have an issue with dairy, ghee is generally very safe. And that was my dinner, and it has been for quite some time. So these are things that are simple to make, that don't take a lot of time. You can use your microwave. I disagree with the notion that microwaves are bad. The research shows that they aren't bad, actually, in the way that they cook foods. Now, you don't want to stand in front of your microwave while it's on, but you can use your microwave. And butternut squash cooks up beautifully in the microwave, frozen butternut squash. So look in those areas. I also think that, you know, all of our beautiful rainbow colored vegetables, the bell peppers, the cruciferous vegetables are also loaded with a lot of wonderful nutrients. Those are things like Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower. Cauliflower rice is in most stores. It's already frozen for you. You just have to heat it up. It's so simple and easy to make. And then again, you just throw in some healthy fats, like maybe some ghee or some avocado oil, and your proteins. And I always put a sauce in there. I love Primal Kitchen sauces. And you've got a really quick and easy meal. So those are things I want to encourage people to focus on, the periphery of the store rather than the middle of the store. And I think that's going to be a real benefit to you and your family, as I mentioned before, about the ability to come together and to be in the kitchen and to have some wholesome meals together.
Sammy, thank you. A couple of things you said just sort of set something off in my brain here. First of all, yes, we're all in sympathetic mode now. A lot of us are. So what does that mean? Let's put this in biochemical terms that most of our audience is familiar with. Pyrroles are going up, okay? So now we've got our families. A lot of people are now back in the same household, whether it's an apartment or a home or whatever have you, that mom and dad's kids, they're in school, but they're at home. And now you've got to juggle all those folks, okay? Stress is going up way high. When that stress is going up, we're depleting ourselves with zinc, of element, to help protect ourselves in the fight against pathological organisms. Zinc really spruces up and supports the immune function. But it also means while we're sucking up those pyrroles while they're increasing, that we become less stress tolerant, that we become more anxious, more depressed, more rageful. And as time goes on, those stressors are going to increase. And this is where it's extremely important for dietary regulation to happen, because it helps to put back those wonderful supplements, those wonderful nutrients into our system. But Sammy, I've got a question for you. So moms out there thinking, okay, now look, junior, juniorette, and junior number 2 are not going to eat that stuff. Okay, in Chicagoland, in the Midwest, we've got our restaurant closed. We might just have a prayer of getting a good nutritional meal. Okay, and all we are left with is the takeout stuff and the delivery stuff. So we've got McDonald's, we've got Popeyes, we've got, okay, some restaurants do deliver, or maybe you can do a drive-through. But on a day-to-day basis, Sammy, what do we feed our kids? You know, they want their McNuggets and they're frozen and we can keep them. They want this and that. That's just not. What do you tell them, Sam?
Yeah, that's something I hear all the time from the parents that I work with. I think that a lot of this goes back to planning. So the number one thing I always encourage parents is you can make large batches. It's called batch cooking, and then put them in the freezer, and then you just pull them out and you have them ready. Now, one thing I want to speak to, and I know I might get some pushback on this, and that's okay. I completely understand, but I appreciate that when we tell our kids no, then they get upset, especially if we've got a lot of imbalanced chemistries, if we've got, pyrrole disorder and copper overload, and there's a lot of anger and rage. Yes, that might come up initially. But one thing I do know that works is that when those things aren't in the house, your child is forced to eat healthy. You're all home together right now. There is going to be an adjustment period. But one thing that does happen, and I see this time and time again, once your child's chemistry changes and they start feeling better and they start realizing that what's making them feel better is the healthy whole foods, then they start asking for those healthy whole foods. Now, healthy food doesn't have to taste bad. It doesn't have to taste like cardboard. That is not my strategy whatsoever. But I feel like even though there is an adjustment period that is uncomfortable initially, like we're all in an adjustment period collectively as a planet dealing with this outbreak. So it's an adjustment period, but I feel that once we get adjusted, once your child gets adjusted, and they, again, when they start feeling better, they're going to want to go to the healthy foods, because when they learn that they have the pizza again or the McDonald's or the Taco Bell and they feel less than stellar, I'll just put it that way, then time and again, I see them going back to the healthy foods. So I hope that's helpful.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sammy. One of the things that we often talk about with our parents who've got children with autism is that we ask them to transition in the first month of our process to more of a ketogenic diet or perhaps a paleo type dietary approach. Not because of the fat issue, but simply because of keeping carbs down and low to help decrease the yeast load. Now, what's interesting is that right now we've got a great opportunity for family bonding. It may not seem like it, but kids will go through their little temper tantrums for about 4 or 5 days, just like you were talking about, Sammy. But once they get over that hump, all of a sudden they're more pliable to, gee, mommy, what is in the house that I can eat because I'm starving? Okay, I'm really hungry. And once they transition into those foods, they are much happier campers. Mood is improved. A variety of things can happen very positively. But parents, you can't give in. Okay, you've got to be firm about that. But this also promotes a great potential family time of bonding. It really does. So now we can go to the stove and start cooking together with our children and showing them how to properly prepare foods. There are a lot of lessons in food preparation, not just with bonding, but also with regard to, here are some good oils to use. Here are some low-fat elements to put in, or here are some good fats to put into this. And kids are watching Top Chef Junior. I know my youngest does. And she's enthralled by watching kids put together meals. This is a great time for families to come together. And, even if it's mom and dad taking turns working with kids on dietary approaches. I mean, the academic day stops at 2:30 or 3, even when this stuff is happening by video. So there's time in there to start bonding more and to share more and to do more. And your kids are going to love you for it after they get over their withdrawal from their iPads and iPhones. Okay. But truly, it's going to be a great time for that. So don't think about the friction that may happen because we're not giving in to our children and to the yeast that are making their decisions dietarily for them. This is a great opportunity to say, hey, let's settle things down. In medical terms, let's defibrillate. Let's stop the nonsense and let the natural heartbeat and rhythms take over again. And this is one opportunity I think we've got a great situation for.
Absolutely. Thank you for saying that, Dr. Mensah. I know next week we're going to talk about the GI tract. And I loved how you said, this is a great opportunity to switch over to a healthier diet for the family to come together, but also to keep in mind, parents, that when your child is craving these foods and when they're acting out, when they're angry, when they're full of rage and there's a lot of temper control problems, it really is the yeast talking. And often there's a lot of bacterial overgrowth as well. So we have to honor the chemistry of your child, the chemistry of the individual, and that's what we specialize in. We want to make sure that people are aware that behavioral challenges often stem from a lot of these disorders that we work with. And if we go back to pyruvate disorder specifically, we know that inherently there's a lot of blood sugar issues with those with pyroluria, especially children. And that is why those zinc-rich foods, which are highest in animal proteins like lamb and beef, are going to be one of the best things that you can feed your child. Again, not only because they are filling and blood sugar stabilizing, but because of the zinc factor and the effect that that has on the brain and the body's ability to create its master antioxidants. the body's ability to ward off invaders and support the immune system. So there's so many reasons why this approach works and why it is, again, why this is a good time to come together and make some changes together as a family.
Sammy, even though we talk about viral disorder and zinc and a variety of other elements, and most of the people out there have heard me talk just tremendously about the fact that a lot of folks are really undermethylated and really they should be engaging in more of the meats and so forth. But let's give a shout out to the vegetables, okay? These are full of antioxidants, okay? Powerful, powerful pieces. We're talking about re-energizing the system here to fight the good fight. And it's not just about the coronavirus, it's about any kind of virus or any type of bacterial agent. Sammy, can you talk about some of the great vegetables that are out there? And kids will eat them, moms and dads. They will get to them. There's usually some vegetable somewhere that a child likes. The key is finding it and balancing the right nutrition. Sammy, what do you say to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mentioned polyphenols earlier. Vegetables, you know, I talk a lot about protein and the importance of protein, but we also have to honor the vegetable kingdom because there are so many, as you said, Dr. Mensah, so many antioxidant-rich, nutrient-dense, nutrient-rich vegetables out there. I mentioned some of those already that are very hearty, that are also very tasty, like the Brussels sprouts. Now, you know, your kitchen might smell a certain way for a while, but, you know, you can, you know, cut some Brussels sprouts in half, throw over some good oil. I love avocado oil. It's a wonderful high heat cooking oil. You know, throw in some salt and throw those in the oven and get them nice and crispy, brown them up a little bit. And they are really, really tasty, loaded with nutrients, loaded with antioxidants. They're in that sulfur-rich category of cruciferous vegetables. You know, one thing I like that is, you know, hearty and also helps with stabilizing blood sugar are sweet potatoes. I think they taste good. Again, you know, thus the name sweet. There's a sweetness about them that kids love. And I think they're great because they help kind of take away or satisfy rather that need for sweet, that need for a candy bar after dinner. So to have all of your macros, again, your proteins, your carbs, and your fats together in one meal is really a powerful punch. Other vegetables that I love, bell peppers, red, orange, yellow bell peppers, those are loaded with nutrients. And again, they're hardy. So I like to go to the hardy vegetables, not that I don't love kale, not that I don't love the lettuces or those wonderful microgreens, but right now, when again, we're focused on foods that are warming to the body and that are going to help with supporting the immune system with regard to this virus, I'm kind of wanting to lean people more in the direction of cooked veggies, things also that you can throw in your soups and your stews. I think bone broth is a wonderful component to anyone's diet, and you can just throw practically anything in there and you know, it tastes wonderful. It's just the right amount of seasoning, of course. So I want people to go more in that category. I think that you know, certain species of mushrooms also have a lot of nutrient power to them, and those are wonderful cooked, scrubbed really well, and then cooked up, again, thrown in a stew, or you can even add those into the roasted Brussels sprouts. There are so many options here, and of course, we're here to help guide you, and you can always ask us questions, but I would steer you in that direction.
Sammy, so we've got our kids who are busy taking their break from classes, okay, online classes, and they're sitting there looking for a quick snack. Now, as opposed to fruit-flavored substances, how about fruit?
Absolutely.
What are some of the great fruits that really just easy snacks that don't seem to affect any particular chemistry?
Absolutely, yeah. I'm glad you brought up fruit. I didn't mention fruit. Blueberries, I always, you know, everyone talks about blueberries and their antioxidant potential. I often recommend things like coconut yogurt, so you're getting away from the dairy, which tends to be very inflammatory, and getting just a plain coconut yogurt and throwing some blueberries in there If you need a little bit more sweet, you know, a little bit of stevia, a few little drops just to start, because if you overdo, it can get quite bitter. But that is a wonderful snack that I often recommend that parents give their kids. You know, obviously if they're in school, when they get home from school and they're waiting for dinner to be prepared. Other great snacks that I recommend are things like flax crackers, if we're going to get more into kind of the nut and seed arena. Those can be very filling. They're very high in fiber. Most kids' digestive systems, which we're going to talk about next week, are not functioning properly. I see a lot of kids that are just really, really constipated. And so we want those fiber-rich foods. That's one of the reasons I love flax seeds. They're really tasty. They're not going to feed the yeast that we talked about, and they make for a great snack. Also, you can take your vegetables and puree them and make a dip. Things like eggplant dip, which is called baba ganoush. Also, you can take your bell peppers and you can puree those, add a little bit of olive oil in there, some salt and some seasoning. Even broccoli can be pureed and made palatable for those picky little eaters. And then they just take their little crackers and dip them in there. So all of these are good options. But yeah, fruits, raspberries, strawberries, those are all going to have, you know, be high in antioxidants and going to be a tasty addition to your child's diet.
I'm going to jump in here because we're getting lots of really good questions, and several of those questions are related to the conversation that the two of you are having. So I'm going to try and, we've got several questions here. I'm going to try and condense some of them. There's probably no way we're going to get to all of them today, but certainly, as I mentioned before, we'll try and answer some in the comments on our Facebook page. We'll hold on to some of these questions for next week as well. But we're getting a lot of folks that are asking specifically about the vegetable-rich diet. A couple of folks who are saying that their systems have a hard time dealing with a lot of vegetables, that it can be upsetting to the stomach. So they're worried about that and looking for either ways to tolerate all of these vegetables and fruits that you're talking about, or some alternatives. We've got someone else asking about frozen vegetables, given the fact that fresh produce is maybe a little bit more difficult to come by, and whether or not those frozen vegetables contain the same nutrients that would be available in the fresh vegetables. And then just the fact that the CDC regulations are suggesting that we don't go out as much, that we engage in social distancing, and therefore, if we're going to eat a diet that is rich in fresh produce, that means going out more often. How do we reconcile that? So that's kind of a collection of several questions.
Thank you, DJ.
Sammy, let me just say one thing here. As a physician, we're all about the CDC recommendations and safety first, okay? But here's the problem. If you don't go and acquire the right foodstuffs, you become a statistic. You become more vulnerable. And when you become more vulnerable, you're more likely to carry on and pass on viruses to other people. So there's a point where you do have to go ahead and find foods. It doesn't mean you go out 32,000 times a day, but maybe out in that morning, or maybe out in that evening when there's low density crowds at the stores, and you pick up some of the things that Sammy's talking about. Sammy.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Mensah. I couldn't agree more. One thing you can do to protect yourself, and that a lot of people are doing here in California, is always having gloves on. You know, when you go into the store and you're touching produce, or you're touching something on the shelf, that's another layer of immunity for you. So I want you to consider that. I totally understand the question with regard to produce. I want to get to the issue with adjusting to more vegetables and the fiber and what's going on in the GI tract when that happens. But one thing I want to share is that frozen vegetables are a great alternative to fresh produce. And I know that those are a little bit more limited. The canned stuff is, of course, is going first, but the frozen vegetables still have a lot of antioxidants in them. Now, are frozen things going to be as good as fresh? I would say no, but a good second best, because whenever they are harvested, they're immediately frozen. I mentioned riced cauliflower earlier. My local Sprouts has riced cauliflower in the frozen section. It's all ready to go. It's organic. It's like $2.50. It's a great part of any dinner. And I have tons of frozen riced cauliflower in my freezer right now. So yes, load up on the frozen organic veggies. Great option. I also mentioned if you're getting fresh produce, bring it home and cook everything. Do some batch cooking where you're making meals in advance and then put it in the freezer. And it will last in the freezer for up to 3 months. So that is also another option rather than going to canned foods and Taco Bell and McDonald's. The question with regard to being able to tolerate more of a higher vegetable diet or incorporating more vegetables in the diet, and there being probably constipation is what is happening. When that occurs, that tells me that there's some microbial imbalances in the GI tract, and what you need to do is just go slow. In that sense, I will often remove things that are, pretty high in fiber that can be difficult on the GI tract to digest and assimilate and tolerate. That cruciferous family tends to be more problematic for those individuals. I think the winter squashes can actually be quite lovely because of the type of fiber and starch that they are. They tend to be easier to digest than those other vegetables. Raw vegetables are going to be really difficult. That's why I always kind of want to steer people more in the cooked category when there is a lot of constipation. But my very best guidance without working with you one-on-one and seeing what's going on with the microbial terrain is to go slow. To go slow and to, do things in small amounts at a time so as not to overwhelm the system. And I'm sorry, DJ, what was the other question? I think there was a third question.
No, I think you covered them all.
Okay.
The difficulty in adopting a primarily vegetable or a lot of vegetables in the diet. The frozen vegetables, I think that covers a lot of that group of questions that we're getting. Let me give you another group of questions here. I've got several folks who are asking about fasting, actually. And one person specifically mentioned the fact that because we're in the Lenten season, several people are fasting for Lent. And they're worried about the impact of fasting on our immune system. So, and then other folks are asking specifically about carbs and how carbs impact the immune system. So if you could kind of address those things.
Yeah, excellent questions. One thing, Dr.
Let's
Mensah,
talk
if you
about
want
fasting, and Sam, you can hit the carbs, I think. First of all, you'd be amazed. Go ahead, Sammy.
I'm sorry, you were cutting out there, Dr. Mensah. Can you repeat that?
Oh, I was saying that let's talk about the fasting thing, and then we'll talk about carbs. I want to make a comment about fasting, which is purely fascinating to me. Fasting is an excellent way to actually clean out your system, to reboot, I can't speak right now, to reboot your immune function and your immune health. It gives your system a chance to settle down and decompress. Food moves through that long 32 feet worth of colon over the course of months, believe it or not days, not hours, months. And that's where huge constipation happens and huge inflammation happens, even in our kids. When you stop eating and you're fasting, and I'm talking about like intermittent fasting, I'm not talking about several days at a time. This gives opportunity for your system to cool down the inflammation. It is really one of your best tools. So I think if you're able to do that and you want to do that, go right ahead. You still got to make sure you're drinking water And it's going to be hard, but if you're on a nutrient program, you still take that nutrient program. It will hit your stomach worse than usual because you're not taking it with food. But if you're intermittent fasting, then simply take them all in that time frame where you are actually eating. But fasting is actually a great way of helping to boost that immune factor for adults. I don't want you making your kids do that, okay? But for adults and teenagers.
And Sam, you said that you would speak to the carbs, and we also had questions about protein and its impact on the immune system as well. So if you could address proteins and carbs as it relates to immune health.
Yeah, and if I can just, Dr. Mensah, if I can just kind of add on to what you said about fasting, my concern, just so listeners can, can be helped with this information, just be watching your blood sugar. I'm observing Lent as well. And a lot of our adult patients have massive blood sugar dysregulation as well. So maybe even a bone broth fast would be good for you. So just tune into your body. I'm a big fan of fasting, but it has to be appropriate. But I love what Dr. Mensah had to say. So was the question regarding carbs that asking if they have a negative impact on the immune system or what impact they have on the immune system?
Just asking what impact they have on the immune system, and the same thing with good protein. How does that support a challenged immune system?
Yeah, that both excellent questions. And the honest answer is it depends. It depends on that internal terrain. For example, if we have a patient that is with a lot of what we call oxidative stress in the gut, meaning they may have SIBO, which is an overgrowth of bacteria in the small intestine, yeast, things like that. I'm seeing a lot more H. pylori in the people that we work with, which is the #1 cause of ulcers. We have to be mindful of that internal microbial terrain when we're talking about macros, specifically carbohydrates. So if that terrain is overwhelmed and overgrown with these types of bacteria and they turn pathogenic, we want to make sure that we're being mindful of the types of not only the types of carbohydrates that we're eating, but the amount. So this is where we want to make sure that, of course, we're leaving out those processed carbs, crackers, cookies, chips, etc. Even a lot of the gluten-free stuff, I'm sorry to say, is really, really junky. There are some crackers that are made with like cassava flour that I really like, but cassava is pretty high starch. So we want to be mindful of those, the types of carbs that we have. And that's why I kind of mentioned earlier, I like to lead people back to those winter squashes because of the type of starch that they are. They're more moderately starchy. They're better digested by the gut bacteria. And overall, they are high in fiber, and overall, they're better on our GI tract. But if you don't have those challenges that I just mentioned, carbohydrates, I feel, are important. They're good for the brain. They're good for the GI tract. They're good for digestion. Believe it or not, they also are helpful with regulating blood sugar when eaten with protein and the good fats. So I think it's all about balance, and it's all about what is really going on internally. But with regard to the immune system, I think that they are important. Of course, when they're coming from things like sweet potatoes, and even regular potatoes can be a healthy part of a diet. Regarding protein, again, this also is dependent upon chemistry, because we have our undermethylators like myself that do better with more protein and need the methyl from those, higher protein foods like your chicken and your turkey and beef and lamb. And then we have our overmethylated population. We don't have as many overmethylators these days, but we do have them. And they need a lower protein diet, not a no protein diet, but lower protein and more vegetable based. So with that being said, honoring biochemistry and again, that internal terrain is how we gauge protein needs. But proteins are amazing in their ability to support the immune system And, you know, the GI tract as well. We know that in vegan and vegetarian diets, stomach acid is low, bile output is low, because there's no protein being consumed, and that's what helps the stomach secrete acid to break those things down. And stomach acid is important for also keeping out those invaders that I mentioned, bacteria and yeast, and bile also is supportive in that arena as well. So I think they're all important for a healthy immune system, but we also want to be mindful of our chemistry. Did you want to add to that, Dr. Mensah?
Yes, first of all, Sammy, that was excellent. Thank you so much. Please keep in mind, Sammy's talking about your fairly typical adult here in this conversation. We will be speaking in future segments about children with autism, children with special needs, and individual groups, and fine-tuning diet and nutrient therapy around those groups to help support immunity. So this is a very general conversation. I don't want any parent calling me telling me that Sammy said my kid could have French fries. That is not what Sammy said, because that's a starch, it's a potato, that's a this, even though they're sweet potato fries. She did not say that, so don't even think about it, okay? What Sammy is talking about is appropriate balance and well-prepared carbohydrates. But again, that is a very individually based construct. You know, for the general population, that's one thing, but most of our audience certainly has particular issues with GI difficulties, with cognitive issues, as she mentioned, hypoglycemic tendencies. Each of those have to be addressed within the framework of that individual person's capacities, challenges, nutrient necessities. But she's given a really excellent presentation for overall balance, which is so key. So let's say out there, you don't know what your chemistry is. You don't know if you're an undermethylator or an overmethylator or high copper. Well, guess what? Your great-grandmother had it right. Balance is the key. It doesn't get you into trouble. It may not shoot you to the stars, but it certainly keeps you above ground, okay? So just keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
Very good. We've got another set of questions, as one would expect, given that many of our friends joining us today are folks that are very familiar with our nutrient protocols that we offer here at Mensah Medical. So lots of questions that are specific to nutrients. A couple of our guests have typed in some questions and listed long lists of supplements that certainly we won't be able to get to here on this particular broadcast, but we did have a couple of more general questions just asking if you are already sick with the flu or even with the coronavirus, or if you're really pushing for prevention, what are some supplements that folks might take that will help support their either recovery or their immunity?
Okay, so that's a fabulous question. That's one we've been anticipating, and one that we kind of started this series to try to help individuals navigate. One of them you already know, because you can't find them in the shelves anywhere. That's vitamin C. Now, I'm going to say vitamin C is very important for every single function your body can go through, including immunity. It's necessary to build tissue, help bone grow, cognition. It's a cofactor in a tremendous number of reactions in the human system. But vitamin C is very potent as an antioxidant, and it's extremely important for immune support and development. Now, here's the problem. If you've got certain challenges like a bleeding disorder, or a past history of stroke, or anything that makes the vasculature sort of challenged, you can't take really high dosages of vitamin C. We'll get to those conversations in future discussions. But one of the things that's important is vitamin C, certainly. And of course, most of you out there who know me know that zinc is my buddy. I have always said, Superman wears that lovely crest and there's an S on it. It should be a Z. That's how powerful zinc is. Zinc is so important, it literally helps with DNA repair. If you're deficient in zinc, and you know your DNA actually makes errors, sometimes thousands of times a second or even a minute or an hour a day, zinc is necessary to help the enzyme that repairs your DNA function. So if you're deficient in zinc, not only is your DNA repair challenged, your immune capacity is also challenged, because zinc is necessary to help support certain cells, including what are called macrophages. Macrophages are like Pac-Man. They chomp, 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 chomp on bacteria and viruses and other agents in the system that create inflammation or disease. So we have vitamin C and we have zinc. The third one I want to include is vitamin D. Now, a lot of you already know about vitamin D in terms of mood and elevating mood, but vitamin D is actually a hormone, and it is a powerful hormone. It does so much throughout the body, it's ridiculous, but immune support is one of the key elements. So if you've got limited funds or you've got tons of nutrients you're taking and you just don't want to take any more, the three big ones are vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D. Now, everyone's got their particular favorites, but everyone agrees on vitamin C. We can tell you now in our work, zinc is huge. As we've explored that one for so long now, zinc is absolutely powerful and everyone should be on zinc. Now, the question is how much? I'm not going to tell you exactly how much. What I'm going to say is during this particular season, if you're on a Mensah medical program or you've been working with Samantha, I'm pretty sure your zinc levels are covered, okay, as is. If you are now sick, however, you may want to, as an adult, increase by perhaps 20 milligrams your total daily dosing of zinc. A lot of you think you've got a good nutrient program in your hands just by supplements you're taking. And I can tell you a lot of you are underdosing. But in terms of illness and prevention, you want to up your dosages of vitamin C, zinc, and vitamin D, but do so with a practitioner. Make that phone call. Get some really solid advice. Don't just do it on your own. But those are the three big ones that I would choose. Sammy?
Yeah, and thank you, Dr. Mensah. And, you know, I mean, I think all of us collectively as a family, Dr. Mensah, we concur that zinc is our favorite. And that's why I mentioned the animal proteins. I've said a couple of times that beef and lamb are one of our highest sources of bioavailable zinc that we don't get from things like, you know, pumpkin seeds. They're just not bioavailable, and that's why I love them. Meat is not bad. Again, we're talking about the internal terrain of the individual and what that individual can tolerate. And you can do so much with food. I mentioned polyphenols. I mentioned all the antioxidants and the wonderful vegetables. If you're having trouble tolerating all of the fiber, which is often hard to digest if you have microbiota issues, then I want to encourage you to go to the proteins, to go to those healthy fats. All of those are going to be really important. Coconut oil is an antiviral, antimicrobial. Using that in your cooking, throwing that into your smoothies. I love C8, letter C, number 8, MCT oil. It's pure caprylic acid. This is a way that you can get extra caprylic acid and use it in a way in your diet. I put it in my tea in the morning. All of these things, again, food, are wonderful in supporting your immune system and providing that support during this difficult time.
And Peter, if you could just comment a little bit, there are a lot of other foods that are potent anti-inflammatories as well. So we answered questions about vitamins, but what are some of the other things, like people talk about turmeric or cinnamon?
Yeah, I was just going to say turmeric. Yeah. It has some golden milk in the morning. I mean, I do that a lot. I'll have it in the afternoon with some coconut milk, and it's so yummy. And I use stevia to sweeten it. There's no sugar in it. So yeah, I love turmeric. I love ginger. Ginger is great for the GI tract, for nausea. If you're one of our patients that has just started with us and you need some, a little extra support with your morning nutrients, ginger is really super helpful. All of those are fantastic. I always encourage people to go in that direction. I'm kind of a little hesitant to mention specific herbs and so forth because people have drastic and varied responses to them. So I don't know if I want to go too far in that direction, but I think those are great key places to start.
So Dr. Mensah and Samantha, we have reached an hour, and boy, has it gone quickly. We want to thank all the people that joined us. There are still several really good questions out there. Again, we will hold on to several of these questions. We'll share them with Dr. Mensah and with
Mr.
Yes.
Wells.
Yes.
Mr. Wells,
Yes, sir.
let's see if, Sammy, can we extend this for 15 more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. I want to help. So let's continue with the questions.
Very good then.
Love to, please.
We'll go another 15 minutes then and try and get a few more of these questions in. And then those of you, again, who can't stay with us for these additional 15 minutes, make sure you check out the Mensah Medical Facebook page, because this video will be posted there. And Samantha, I believe you said that we're going to post this to your page as well. So
Yes, absolutely.
there will be ways for folks to tune in and get the rest of these questions down the road. And again, even those that we don't get to today, we'll make sure we're addressing them in the weeks to come. One of the questions that that I'm seeing here a couple of times are folks talking about the fact that when they do get food from restaurants delivered or carry out, or if they're having groceries delivered, what's the safety factor in terms of coronavirus exposure with delivery services, carry out services, that type of thing?
Okay,
Well,
go ahead, Samantha.
sorry. I mean, the first thing that always comes to my mind is you can use a little bit of baking soda and soak your veggies in baking soda for half an hour, rinse them really well, and then cook them up. That's one thing you can do. But Dr. Mensah, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
No, I mean, that's a legitimate concern because, oftentimes people are delivering it, and whether you're one of those people who's got, say, the Ring doorbell and they just deposit it on the ground and you pick it up, quite honestly, that's probably the safer route to go than greeting someone at the door and exchanging that kind of so-called air and so forth. But consider that anytime you take any package in your hands, you've always encountered bacteria from some source, let alone viruses. So doing the stuff that you see everywhere in the news, washing your hands, you handle that cardboard box, you handle that plastic, you plop it down somewhere on the kitchen table. Well, guess what? The safest thing is you get that stuff, you unload it, wash your hands, clean up the kitchen counter before you prepare any foods, throw out those other things. A lot of hand washing, unfortunately, is happening here. Or if you're going to wear gloves, for example, the plastic gloves that Samantha was talking about earlier, I'm pretty sure those aren't out of stock. And you can actually use them to transport outside influences into the home and then take off your gloves after you finish manipulating everything. So there are ways to go about this, but it's still safe. Or I should say safer.
Absolutely.
Very, very good. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions here. Folks that are saying, we had a conversation about protein and the fact that meats aren't a bad thing. However, some were asking, what about protein powders and drinks and protein bars? Do they provide methyl in the same fashion as meats? Can they be used as a substitute?
Yeah, great question. I would not recommend using them as a substitute for an actual meal where you have those whole nutrient dense foods together. But I think they can be an important part of your diet. I do use protein powders. I'm at the gym a lot, and they really help me because I just don't have time to make a big breakfast in the morning. Again, depending on your biochemistry and what you can tolerate, I tend to move people more in the area of collagen proteins, protein powders, Designs for Health makes it's called a pure paleo protein, and that's a collagen base as well. I tend to steer people in that direction, and we're strictly, again, we're talking about people that have either normal methylation or are under methylated. These things are going to be way too high in methionine for our over methylation population. You're going to want to go with something that is more plant-based, a rice, it's like a sprouted organic rice protein powder. They tend to not taste that great, but if you can tolerate them, then that would be more appropriate. But I do tend to encourage people to stay away from dairy products, and I prefer those types of protein powders.
Dr. Mensah, anything to add to that?
No, I thought that was an excellent discussion. Excellent, Sammy. Thank you.
Very good. Another question I have here, several of the foods that you've suggested, such as mushrooms, avocados, are high in copper,
High in copper.
and we've got folks out there that
I knew what you were going to say.
that do
So did I.
have these concerns, and so they're asking about how to incorporate these things when they do need to be cognizant of their copper intake.
Absolutely. So I didn't say avocados, I said avocado oil, and there is a big difference. The oils are not going to be problematic. It's just the whole fruit. Coconut is about half the copper content of almonds. And then if you're talking about something like a coconut milk, it's going to be watered down. So I often include coconut products, if they're tolerated, into my protocols for my copper toxic patients, because I want to steer you away from inflammatory dairy, and yet I want to give you options. Flax does not have, you're not going to find the issues with copper and flax seeds. So the flax crackers, which are pretty tasty, those are a great snack. I would caution you, yes, from whole avocados. I would caution you, yes, from mushrooms. Initially, things like spinach, some of these vegetables that we know tend to collect copper. I do also want to make sure that people are aware, and this is in my low copper cookbook, that it really depends on the soil in which the food is grown. We know that our soils here in the United States have been, depleted, even if it's organic. So I always wonder, we really don't know exactly the copper content. I provide guidelines in my cookbooks, but do yourself a favor and don't drive yourself crazy trying to figure all this out. I think is staying away from things like coffee and chocolate and most nuts and seeds. Also things in the legume category tend to be high copper. You're going to be fine. And I want to encourage taking the stress away, moving more into parasympathetic, that rest and digest mode, out of fight and flight, and just sticking to more of your protein foods, your good oils, and vegetables. So I hope that's helpful. Of course, it really is going to be dependent on the individual, how I would put together a protocol and their actual copper level, or levels, plural. But I think that is a good place to start.
I've got one question here that I think is kind of interesting. Since Dr. Mensah and Sammy, you both talked about eating or drinking warm things to warm our system to fight off some of these viruses and bacteria. I've got a question here saying, I'm sick and eating only broths right now. I'm wondering if the broth is providing enough nutrient support as opposed to eating something that has more whole foods in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, Dr. Mensah, chime in, kind of going back to that conversation with regards to when you have a fever, when your body is trying to fight something off, when you're taking in broth, which does have a nice, nutritional profile, you are effectively, when you're not eating whole foods, you're taking away that burden of digestion. It really takes a lot of energy for your body to digest food, believe it or not, especially things that are heavier, like your proteins and some starches. So I think one of the very best things you can do when you have a fever and when you're not well is to, of course, rest, stay in bed, drink your broth every, couple of hours. But it can be very beneficial to stay away from whole foods for a short period of time to give your body that energy to put towards that healing process rather than the digestion or the digestive, process. But Dr. Mensah, you probably have other things to add to that.
No, I agree with what you're saying. You know, the difficulty is that when we're sick, we often still run the risk in the healing process of malnourishment because we're not eating. Now, I really shouldn't say this, but I'm going to have to. Dairy sensitivities aside, color sensitivities aside, there are some choices that in a rough patch you may just want to turn to. I'm not really a person who's marketing anything, and I have no financial interest in what it is I'm about to tell you. And I probably shouldn't say this. But there are some interesting products that go plop, plop, fizz, fizz in water that are rich in vitamin C right now that you can buy over the counter, that are rich in certain nutrient elements. There are certain dietary liquids out there that actually claim to help you lose weight, that are prepackaged and labeled in red and white, that are actually rather nutrient dense. If you take 2 of them in a day, you can't eat maybe, but you drink 2 of these things, and believe it or not, you've got some nutrition in there. It's not a substitute for food, but listen, if all you're able to take down is broth, you're ill, you can't stomach anything else, these are some great options, because what's the deal? Why do you eat in the first place? You eat so that food can be broken down into nutrients. So while I'm not saying that liquid nutrients are better, they're better than nothing, and they're going to help you fight the good fight if you can't eat a decent diet, okay? So, okay, Vitafusion makes one of these liquid pop-pop things I was talking about, and their vitamin C is gone from the shelves. You just don't see it. I own no stock in Vitafusion. Let me tell you that right now, okay? Or anything else I'm telling you about. But even in traditional medicine, for people who are, elderly or who can't eat, there are products out there like Ensure that people take in for some level of sustenance. Now, Ensure is not the one I was talking about with that label. I don't want to go there. But there are other things that can help support you, even if you're not able to consume real food. Having some nutrition is better than no nutrition at all.
All right, we're coming to the end of our 15-minute extension now. Again, time's flying. I've got one last question here. I've got someone asking, how do I know if my immune system is healthy? How do I know what I need to do to boost my immunity?
I can't believe that question actually came through. It almost sounds like it was sent to us, because we have a new program that we're initiating with Direct Health Lab regarding immune support and immune health. So this is not about finding out what all of your SNPs are, or how to overcome severe immune compromised situations. We're talking about a baseline level of immune support, and it's called the Immune Support Program, or ISP. Okay, you can contact Direct Health Labs at either email at pyroluria.testing.com or area code 1-847-222-9546. And even look on their website. That should be probably active tomorrow with regard to this new program, where we can actually evaluate baseline things that can kind of tell you, okay, you know what, here's where you need to supplement a little bit more, here's where you need to supplement a little bit less, or here are some things you can do given your absolute levels. And it's a very simple process, 15, 20, 30-minute conversations, maybe at most, and immune health can be really sort of supported in this way. We're not looking to turn you around totally in terms of every nuance, but there are some key variables that can be evaluated and consulted on just very quickly to help everybody move through this in the best way possible.
Very good. So again, thank you everyone who has listened in today. Thank you, Dr. Mensah. Thank you, Samantha Gilbert, for your knowledge and all that you've shared with us today. again, I think we got to most of the questions in some form or fashion, but we'll go through these questions again, see if there's anything else that folks are asking, and make sure that they get covered. Join us again next week. We'll be back here again next week at 4 o'clock Central. That's 2 o'clock Pacific, 5 o'clock East Coast. And we'll learn some more from Dr. Mensah and from Samantha Gilbert. They've mentioned that we'll be talking a lot about GI issues and the like. So please do join us again next week. And once again, if you weren't able to watch all of this, or if you know of other folks who might be interested in this information, please guide them to the Mensah Medical Facebook page where this video will live. Guide them to Samantha Gilbert's webpage. We'll be posting it there as well. And we'll see you again in a week's time.
Mr. Wells, just one moment. Sammy, could you give them a little bit more detail on what we'll be talking about this week?
Yep.
Sammy, still there?
Yes, I'm here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, can you give us your website, your webpage address so that folks know how to get there?
Oh, yes, I apologize. Yes, it's real simple, but it can be, I think sometimes it's complicated. Eat4.life, not .com, .life. And that's how you can find me.
Sammy, could you also tell them a little bit of what we'll be talking about next time, more specific?
Oh, yeah, I'm really excited because we're going to be talking about the GI tract, which is kind of one of my favorites. But we're going to be talking about cellular immunity. I think we're going to take a lot of what we are discussing today and bringing into the GI tract, and how what's going on in your gut impacts every body system that you have. It impacts your immune system on a significant level, how that creates a domino effect. We're going to talk about antibiotics. We're going to talk about breastfeeding and autism and things working together. So I'm very, very excited. I really hope that you'll join us. I think there's going to be a lot of great questions that come out of next week. And we want to make sure that you're supported in this area as well as we move forward in this pandemic.
Thank you, Sammy.
Thanks, Sammy. Again, thanks to both of you, our panelists, and thank you to everyone who has tuned in. We really are signing off now. We'll see you next week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.